kind of taking a slight segue in the area of AI and BPM. I have to say there's a lot that I love about the promise of AI and BPM, but I'm also kind of terrified at the idea of generative AI creating BPM
Yeah.
that just gets released right out there without,
hmm
you know, without like a say so or a true sort of exercise to make sure we don't have any like weird paths that are doing stuff. I'll give you an example. I have a client now that is using BPMN to control literally giant robots, right? It's really
Okay.
cool. But you can
That
imagine
sounds a little scary, actually.
it's terrifying and it's really cool, right? I mean, you can draw the diagram and put it in, and you see like these giant robots moving up and down and using their pinchers and picking stuff up, and it's awesome. But, can you imagine like generative AI, like figuring out the fastest way to move this packet just to run over that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
or something?
yeah.
But that's a little terrifying to me. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing AI and BPM in a number of different ways. So what happened is during September, I was at the academic research conference in Utrecht in the Netherlands, where AI was a big topic of conversation. And then I was at CommundaCon, where you and I met up in New York after that. And then I also was talking with some other vendor clients about what they're doing with AI. And I'm seeing a lot of different places where AI and BPM intersect. So it's not just one thing. Like you can have generative AI doing certain things like, creating some process models for you. But I think the more common thing that we're seeing, or the sort of the three sort of common use cases that I'm seeing. One is like a co-pilot for a designer. So somebody who's building a process model and has AI kind of helping them, where they can say, I want a model that kind of does this and that, and maybe the AI can come with something, and then they can
Yeah.
play around with it a little bit more. You're not going to have AI just generate the process model itself. The second thing is actually automating steps within a process. So doing that with AI. And I think, a lot of the things that we've seen from machine learning in the past flows into that fairly well, as long as we have constraints around what it is allowed to do. So if you're using, a large language model, you want to make sure that it's not being trained on just general stuff out in the wild in the internet, that it's actually being trained on your data sets and, your industry data, and maybe even some of your client data, so that you can, which means you have to do it in a captive sense, not in a public sort of chat GPT sense, right? But you could have, so certain tasks get automated. So then the third use case is looking at, again, sort of a co-pilot, but a co-pilot for the end users, for the knowledge workers. So then the knowledge workers would have an AI co-pilot who would help them with what they were doing. So they would have a task like an insurance claim, for example, or something like that. And at a certain point, they would need some assistance on what do I do next, or
Yeah.
what's, what should I do in this sort of complex situation? And they would have some AI that would help them with that. So there's three very different use cases. So you just say AI and BPM in the same sentence.
It's
There's a
terrifying.
lot of different things that can actually come from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, to me, the least intrusive and potentially the most helpful approach is advisory for people who are actually executing the process, right?
Yeah, the knowledge workers. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And then that, I think, would naturally maybe lead to some suggestions, some improvements, like, hey, like a ridiculous example, but people are choosing the United States as the country of origin like 7 times out of 10, but you've got it on the 5th tab of the UI. Why don't you put that on
Mhm.
or something, right? Or pre-select that, or there's a
Well,
path.
you pre-select it, and then it just annoys the rest of us countries, right? So, but
Right.
yes, I understand what you mean, and definitely we've been seeing this with things like next best action
Yeah.
sort of decisions that get made as well. So we've been using machine learning and decision management in various ways to support knowledge workers by saying, well, here's a suggestion of what you might want to
Right.
do next, or in this particular case. And we're just amping that up a little bit by bringing the more modern AI to bear on this, to say like, oh, well, it's not just this input and this input leads to these possible outputs. It's like you have this very complex context. You have a client who has these things going on in their different products that they own, and they have this going on in their life events. And here's the particular scenario that we're talking about. What do we do? And so it's not a straightforward just decision, A plus B equals either C or D.
I'm going to tell a story that sounds completely unrelated, but give me about 60 seconds.
Okay.
In the 90s, I was a typical grad student. I'd go to the coffee shops that were very popular at the time, and I'd play a lot of chess. I was a competitive chess player. I'm what's considered like an A player, which is just below an expert. And not that that's impressive. It's really not. It's like saying I played high school tennis. But what was interesting at the time was that AI engines for chess were coming up. And there was a lot of sort of hubbub in the chess community. Oh, a machine could never beat a person. Oh, it's the end of times if computers can never beat people. And then I remember Gary Kasparov, Kasparov or Karpov, I forget which one, and playing like Big Blue. And the first year they beat him, and the next year he was beaten. And we were all like, oh, this is terrible. And now, I mean, my phone can outplay me
exactly.
But it has not hindered me in any way as a chess player. As a matter of fact, it's great because I can choose a rating that's a little bit above mine, and I can play against somebody better.
Right.
I suspect that we're going to find the same thing with AI and BPM. Eventually, I think the AI engines are going to be able to generate better BPMs than we are based on the process definition. And what I mean better, what I mean is in the first pass.
Right. But I think that your chess analogy is really valid because, like you say, you were like the level below expert. So you weren't basing your persona on I'm a chess expert. Whereas there are people out there who are like, well, I'm an expert on this particular process, and you're now going to have AI come in and tell me how to do it better or try to do it better than me when I've spent this time learning this. So you do start to get into, I don't want to say egos because it's more than that, but it's just, there's some pretty complex stuff that's going on, and you're trying to replace that. And we don't even understand all the things. Like, I mentioned insurance claims before, and I do a lot of work with insurance customers. And so claims is one of those areas where you get somebody who's been doing this for 5 years, and they look at it and they say, oh, well, we should be doing this or that. And then you ask them why they're doing this or that, and they might be able to tell you, or they might just know that it looks that way, right? So there's some things that are just, the knowledge is embedded in there. And although we can start to tease it out with AI, because we could say, well, the expert made this decision and this was the context. And then we can start to, you do that thousands of times over, and then you can start to draw some correlations in there. But it's, you are going to have people that are going to say, oh, no, I don't want the AI doing that because, I'm the expert.
There's that, tribal knowledge that happens, right?
Yeah.
We just do it this way, and there's like these non-connected sort of linear reasoning that still works, and it's the reason that you do it this way. So I think that's really interesting.